In our money lead, President Trump's visit to the Federal Reserve headquarters today was born from his continuing anger at Fed Chair Jerome Powell's unwillingness so far to lower interest rates. Those closely watching the friction are warning that the value of the dollar could be at risk. Joining us now is one of those voices, Ray Dalio, who's a global macro investor who anticipated many of the financial crises the world has faced. He's the founder of the hedge fund Bridgewater Associates and the author of the brand new book, How Countries Go Broke, The Big Cycle, which is out now. And Ray, in this book, you have an analogy for the relationship among a country's government, its bank, and its debt. You write, to me, credit and money and credit are the lifeblood of the economy. The central government is like the brain that directs how the system works. The central bank is like the heart that produces and pumps money and credit through the system. What is your take on President Trump pushing the Fed chair to lower interest rates in terms of the good of the health of the economy as you speak of it?
It's mostly about the storehold of wealth aspects of money. You know, there's a balance. If you lower interest rates too much, then the creditor will get a bad return. And if you have interest rates too high, then it's bad for the debtor. And there's a balance. And always governments the political system wants the stimulation, provide credit, and with the providing of the credit, everybody's happy because things go up, but they go up as you accumulate a lot of debt. And now we're in a situation where the government has such a large amount of debt and has a problem facing that debt, paying that debt. And so naturally there's a pressure to lower those interest rates. And we're now in a different political environment in which the separation is being called into question because of the desire to lower those interest rates, to lower debt service, which is a problem as a storehold of wealth, as it doesn't provide a high enough return. So that balance is being called into question when you also have the independence being called into question.
So President Trump recently passed, with the help of the Republican Congress, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill Act, his domestic economic agenda. The Congressional Budget Office projects it could add $3.3 trillion to the federal deficit over the next decade because of the continuation of these tax cuts. And actually, I think the 10-year projection of debt is still something like $20 trillion more in debt, even more. Based on the conversations you've had with leaders in Washington, Republicans and Democrats, what are your thoughts now that that bill is a law, in addition to the $9 billion in additional spending cuts against USAID and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting?
The economics of a country are the same as the economics of an individual or the economics of a country, of a company, except the government can print money and take money by taxes. So let's look at that. What we have is we're spending $7 trillion a year this year. We'll spend $7 trillion. We'll take in $5 trillion. So we're spending 40% more money than we're taking in. And we've accumulated a debt that's 6 times the amount of the money that we're taking in. As a result of that, interest payments and debt service payments are adding up. And the way it works is like the circulatory system works. Credit, as it goes through the system, brings nutrients and buying power to different parts of the system. And if that money is used to produce income, it's a healthy system because it pays the debt. But when it accelerates, it crowds out spending. And so you're seeing that debt service, interest, crowding out spending. And that's the same as that circulatory system essentially having plaque in the circulatory system.
Cholesterol, right.
You could see it happening. And as a result of that, there's a supply-demand problem. As you mentioned, what happens is that $2 trillion a year is going to grow, and that's going to be nearly $25 trillion of new money that has to be sold. But in addition, we have to roll over the debt. And so we have that kind of a debt service problem. There are things that can be done, but it's politics that's standing in the way. If right now the budget deficit is about 7% of GDP, it can be cut to about 4% of GDP, 3 or 4%. So there's an ability to do that. But in order to do that, it has to come from a little bit of everything. It has to come from a little bit of taxes, a little bit about 4% increase in taxes, essentially, 4% decrease in spending. And if that's done, then there will be the equivalent of an interest rate cut, and that'll be balanced. If we don't do that, we are going to have a supply-demand problem. And one can see that, like a doctor looking at that plaque in the system, you can see that.
President Trump makes the argument that the tariffs that he's imposing, that the Fed says is the reason that they're not lowering interest rates because of all the instability and unsureness caused by the tariffs, that he says that those will help make up the revenue that the U.S. needs to fix the debt.
Well, it's correct that the tariffs, if done correctly, will bring in a significant amount of tax revenue. I would estimate about $300 billion a year, and over 10 years, that's $3 trillion, and that's significant. And part of that is also paid for by the foreigners who are exporting. There's some merit to that. But we have a problem nonetheless in terms of this supply-demand situation. It's not going to be enough to deal with that situation. And if we don't deal with it soon, then that increase in the amount of debt that will be experienced will end up causing that problem. It's a political problem. I was in Washington speaking to members of Congress on both sides, and Senate and the House. And pretty much everybody agrees on the supply, demand, and the issue. But it's a political problem. What I was told is essentially now politics are such that you have to make a pledge, at least one of two pledges. And that pledge is, I pledge not to raise your taxes.
Right.
And or I pledge not to cut your benefits. And with those pledges, those political pledges, and both sides exerting a lot of pressure to do that, there's not going to be a resolution of that unless there's some bipartisan commission or something that might happen later, but unlikely, I don't think.
I agree. There was one called the Bowles-Simpson Commission that everybody abandoned after it was done. Ray, it would be great to have you come back, not just when you're talking about a book. I hope you'll come back and talk more about this incredibly important issue.
Thank you. Of course.
The book, one more time, it's called How Countries Go Broke, The Big Cycle, by Ray Dalio. It's available now. Thanks so much for joining.